started doing this work when I was about 15 years old, when I started seeing that when I would talk about sexual assault, I only heard adults speaking. I only heard about stories about women that had survived and were now thriving, but nobody talking about how we actually were healing in the moment. And I started to think about what I could do and how I could have conversations with my peers, with my family, with people I dated, about how to support me and how we could support each other to address sexual violence in our lives. And so I started doing this work actually with METRAC. METRAC was the place where I started learning about how to do this education work, and actually was a part of the first cohort of the REACT program. And with that program, it was a way for me to really start thinking about not only was this something that I held as an issue in my life, but also an issue that happened in many of the young women that I came in contact with, and also young men. And it was something that I really thought was an important piece. As I grew in my work, I started thinking about how we can better support each other. And so I come to this piece where I've been working with a number of different projects, including Outburst and this group called Femifesto. And one of the things that I learned was I was at a talk with this woman named Adrienne Marie Brown. And if you want to be inspired, you need to check out her blog and check out her work. She's a Black woman from Detroit who's doing a lot of amazing work around community organizing and transformative justice. And she talked about this idea of radical biomimicry. And she talked about this idea that when we do organizing around any issue, specifically around issues of violence, we have to start thinking about how nature works. So she talked about looking at oak trees. And we know that oak trees, their root systems grow together underneath the ground so that they can hold each other accountable and also hold each other to be okay when rough winds come. And also things like otters. I'm obsessed with otters. I think they're adorable. But otters actually hold hands when rough waters come so they can take care of each other. And when we think about sexual assault work, I want us to think about how we take care of each other in that work. How we take care of each other when we challenge systems of oppression and rape culture, but also how do we take care of each other when we experience violence. When someone discloses to us in our lives, who we love, that they've experienced violence. And so that kind of piece around radical biomimicry really inspires my work now, and really it's something that I think about a lot. And of course, this is an image of a lot of otters. Cool. So the piece that I've been really, and we hear the term rape culture a lot in the media, and this actually is by a group called Seattle Army Girls, spelled with a GRRLS. And they actually do radical graffiti in their communities around this issue. And this is one of their graffiti pieces. And they talk about what rape culture is. And we see rape culture all the time. We see rape culture in the way that there's an expectation that rape is something natural that happens to us, that men are preconditioned to want to sexually assault women, that it's something that they're predators, the idea that it's okay that our bodies are available. And we see that with images like this one that's done by American Apparel that was on the back of Now magazine a couple of years ago. Obviously, it speaks not only about the way that we think about gender, but also the way we think about women of color's bodies. That our bodies are available, that somehow we are supposed to be at the beck and call of men in our communities, or men in any community. But what I get inspired about is about people doing questions back. So this is a picture from Slut Walk in DC that I was a part of, and these are a group of young Muslim women that we marched with. And they said, don't tell us what to wear, tell men not to rape. And it is flipping that conversation, that it's not about us holding, as cisgendered women or trans women, to hold men that we should make it, that they shouldn't rape, but it's actually their responsibility as well. And what I've been inspired about too is that women of color are really leading a lot of these conversations in their communities and talking about the intersectionality piece of it. The fact is that women of color experience violence in a different way in terms of how we access the criminal justice system, or how we're able to get access supports. I know myself, when I work with young Muslim women, a lot of the conversations we have is the stereotypes and assumption that people have once we walk into a counseling office, that somehow we don't deserve the same supports. We know that this happened at C.W. Jeffries a number of years ago, where a young Muslim woman was orally raped for a number of months. And she went to the principal, and she went to a teacher, and nothing was done. And later on, when it was discussed, the principal said, well, I was protecting her because I knew that she would experience violence in her home if they found out that this had happened, so I was making it safer for her. So someone making decisions about how we experience violence and how we heal from it. Other groups that I'm really inspired by right now is what's happening at Sacred Heart in the Greater Toronto area. Do people know about Sacred Heart? Maybe some of us are from Sacred Heart. But Sacred Heart is a high school, I think it's a Newmarket, and people near Newmarket. And they had a number of young women started seeing their pictures being put on this website to either bang or not bang. And young women actually started speaking out about it. And I was really inspired by that. One of the young women was on Metro Morning on Monday speaking about how she found that it was really derogatory that the pictures were being shown and you were talking about if they're sexually available or not, as if the women had no consent, had no right or no choice of what it is. And I thought it was interesting because the media really focused on, well, you gotta be careful about what pictures you put on the internet or on Instagram, or really think about how you promote yourself. And the young woman was like, well, it doesn't matter what pictures I put up. It matters how people take them and use them for their will. And we shouldn't be blamed for that. The other piece I'm really inspired by is also what's happening on the streets. So I don't know if people know who Tatiana is, but she is doing this amazing project called Stop Telling Them to Smile. And it's a street harassment program that started in New York and now has traveled all over. And she sends the posters for free to women and says, do week pacing in your community to talk about street harassment. And what I love about it is, again, it's a Black young woman doing this work and actually creating it free for women to kind of spread the news about this piece. About the idea that our job is not to just smile on the street and make people feel nice, it's actually we have a right to say no. This is a project that I'm in love with too, is that what I'm loving seeing is also women telling their stories. I'm interested in talking about the fact that sexual violence is happening. We know that. We know as people in this room that we have friends, lovers, community members, that these things happen. But also the pieces where we also get blamed for that, or somehow told that it's our fault, and how young women are speaking about that. This is a project, it was a project called the Is It Project, and it was actually young South Asian women speaking out about violence that happened in their lives. And when people initially thought about the project, they said, great, I really want to hear about the family violence that's happening in South Asian women's lives. We need to hear these stories. And these young women kind of pushed back on that and said, well, it's not just about family violence, it's about the violence we experience on the streets, in our homes, in our schools, the racism that we experience on a daily basis. And this young woman did a story called the Desi Girl Diaries, where she talked about actually being slut-shamed as a hijabi woman and being called a hijabi in her school for wearing too skinny jeans, not wearing the right kind of clothes that supposedly a Muslim woman's supposed to wear. And so she made a comic book about it. And I, of course, am in love with it. The other piece that, if we cannot, we're on TV and we're on stolen land. As settlers, some of us here are settlers, recognizing that young women have been fighting back about that piece, about the missing and murdered Aboriginal women. And for me, I'm really inspired by how many young women are participating in that movement and leading that movement. This is from one of the protests that just happened recently. And this young woman was talking about how they trespass our bodies like they trespass on this land. And the idea that rape culture has been happening in Canada since Canada's inception. That the idea that the raping of Aboriginal women was a part of the creation of this country. And if we talk about rape culture, when we talk about violence against women, we need to have conversations about that. The last two pieces that I'm really inspired by too is Tumblr. I don't know how many people here have Tumblr? Really? Secretly have Tumblr? Okay, whatever. It's like when you say don't do selfies. But Tumblr right now is my newest, it's been my obsession for a number of years, but what I really love about it is the conversations that are happening about rape culture and sexual assault. We see survivors telling their stories. We see survivors actually naming that violence has happened in their lives. We see survivors connecting their stories together. There's an amazing project called Project Unbreakable, and check it out if you haven't seen it already. And it's survivors talking about the messaging that they have received from people when they were sexually assaulted, and also the messaging they received from people that have been supportive. So this is one person that says, "I believe you, my best friend, and the best sentence someone ever told me." And we know this. We know that the idea that someone will believe you when you experience sexual assault is so powerful and important, because the idea is that oftentimes we're told by our abuser that somehow it's our fault, that no one will believe us, because we have no power. And a powerful piece to say back to us is, "I believe you." And this is the last piece I'd like to leave you with, is these ideas. I spend a lot of my time doing counseling with young women who've experienced sexual assault and violence. And a lot of the work that we do is asking, well, why isn't people being supportive, or what are ways I can get support from others? And the conversation oftentimes I say is like, let's turn it to you. What are the messages that we, because of rape culture, because of violence in our lives, have actually taken on ourselves? Things that we actually started believing that are okay to say. And actually challenging that with our own affirmations. So this is actually a poster about affirmations that young women made about violence that they experienced. And I'm going to read them to you because I think they're really powerful. The first one that the one young woman said was, "It's not my fault." And we know this piece is really, really important, because we're oftentimes told it is our fault for the violence that happens to us. So a reminder that it's not our fault. The next piece is that I'm making a new story, reminding us that the sexual assault didn't start or end our lives, but it's a part of our lives, and that we're working through that every day. Another piece is I'm healing on my own and with others. And I love that, the idea that our healing happens in community, but also happens individually, and that there's a power in that. Ending the cycle of violence in my family makes me a good daughter, sister, cousin, mother, grandmother, friend, community member. Oftentimes I hear young women say, well, I'm bad. There's something bad about me. And our challenge back is actually, when you speak out about violence, you're ending the cycle of violence in your family, and that actually makes you a good family member. And that makes you amazing. And then my voice matters. We are told oftentimes to be quiet when violence happens, in our families, in our communities, when racism happens. A big piece of this is that your voice matters, and that you matter when you speak. And the last piece that you say to yourself is, I believe myself. Because when sexual violence happens, or any form of violence happens, it's sometimes easier for us to kind of say, you know what, I can't even deal with this, so maybe it's not so bad. Maybe it was okay. Maybe I shouldn't have sat beside them. Maybe I shouldn't have done this. No, we're going to remind ourselves that I believe myself, and I have a right to be safe. So thank you, and I'm so excited about being here, and thank you, METRAC, for having me.